No one will tell you this, but I will. The world doesn't respect innocence. People love to romanticize the idea that kindness attracts kindness, but Machiavelli warned centuries ago that politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that those who insist on living on illusions end up crushed. The end justifies the means, and when the means is to protect your dignity, there's no room for naivete. You can believe in love, friendship, and companionship, but true human nature follows a different code. Respect always goes to those who convey strength, not fragility. And here's the provocation. How many times have you diminished yourself, expecting others to value your humility, only to discover it turned into ammunition against you? How many times has your silence been interpreted not as wisdom, but as weakness? Better to be feared than loved isn't a cold phrase from an ancient book. It's a living law regulating work relationships, family relationships, friendships, and even love relationships. And to ignore it is to accept living in the shadows, subject to the games of others. There is a secret that separates those who are swallowed up from those who become untouchable. It's not money, it's not a title, it's not a diploma. It's the ability to control how you're perceived, to project an aura of certainty, even when chaos reigns within. The appearance of virtue, the calculated use of force, loyal armies of your own, all of this isn't philosophical discourse. It's the invisible engineering that shapes how the world reacts to your presence. And those who master this engineering don't demand respect, they extract it. But here comes the shocker. This strategy isn't reserved for kings, generals, or CEOs. It's available to you right now if you have the courage to apply it. Courage to understand that being nice doesn't protect, that passivity doesn't inspire, that expecting recognition rarely works. History has always favored those who dared to act as if they were greater than they appeared. It doesn't matter if you're a student, an employee, or a leader. When you don this psychological armor, the game changes. And I won't sugarcoat it. This strategy is feared because it works. It's disturbing because it exposes truths everyone tries to hide. But if you stick with it, you'll discover how to use the same principles that turned ordinary figures into legends. Now I ask you, would you rather continue being ignored, or are you ready to enter the invisible battlefield and discover the secret that can make you untouchable? One of the most uncomfortable secrets Machiavelli left us is the mental posture of superiority. This isn't empty arrogance, but a policy guided by reality, not naive ideals. Those who act as if they're already the best give others the impression that they are, in a suit. It's an ancient psychological game. The end justifies the means when the goal is to build authority. When someone enters a room with conviction, even the most banal details, like the way they hold a glass or greet someone, become signs of dominance. It's better to be feared than loved, said the Florentine, and that phrase resonates precisely here. Respect is born of firmness, not hesitation. A mind trained to see itself as above challenges transforms every gesture into a symbol. It's as if the simple act of sitting at a table already carries an aura of power. The curious detail is that even without titles or material achievements, this type of mental posture creates space and silence around. Imagine a young professional entering their first meeting with experienced directors. If they shrink, appear anxious, reinforcing the idea that they are small. But if they hold their head high, speak slowly, look you in the eye, they convey the appearance of virtue and confidence, even if deep down they harbor insecurity. Virtue and fortune work together in this scenario. Virtue is the preparation, the courage to act as if you were already great. Fortune is the favorable response that will inevitably come when others believe this. Decisions based on real human nature show us that people are guided by perceptions, not absolute truths. If you act as if you were a leader, you will be treated as one. It's the calculated use of the invisible force, psychological strength. And the more consistent this posture, the harder it is for others to deny the obvious you yourself have created. This mental posture of superiority is trainable. It can start in the mirror, with the simple exercise of observing yourself as someone worthy of respect. One practical tip is to train your voice. Speaking clearly, avoiding verbal crutches, reinforces this image. Another is to take care of your physical posture. Open shoulders, direct gaze, firm steps. These are simple gestures that build your own loyal armies, not soldiers of flesh, but habits that defend you against the perception of weakness. When you adopt these small practices daily, you are forging within yourself a psychological armor. And curiously, this silent training affects how others feel around you. Some hesitate to interrupt, others bow to your rhythm. It's reality-driven politics in action, in its most everyday and tangible form. Don't confuse this mentality with foolish arrogance, however. The difference lies in how you use this superiority, not to crush, but to command. Avoiding hatred is as important a principle as demonstrating firmness. A leader who presents himself as superior without strategic respect quickly falls from grace. On the other hand, one who cultivates an imposing presence but still knows how to smile, listen, use silence, and maintain balance. The end justifies the means when the result is strengthening your position without the strain of confrontation. It's like a game of chess. You don't need to knock down all the pieces to show you're the best. You just need to maintain your advantage until your opponent surrenders to the inevitable. And this inevitable is forged in the invisible, in the mind trained not to waver. Consider historical figures who dominated not only by their possessions, but by the way they carried themselves. From Julius Caesar to Churchill, they all carried an aura built on a mental posture of superiority. They made decisions based on true human nature, understanding that men respect what appears solid, even if there are cracks underneath. Constant adaptability was what kept them standing, knowing how to change their expression, tone, and strategy, but never giving up the impression of firmness. It is precisely this balance that Machiavelli pointed to when he said that the appearance of virtue is more valuable than the virtue itself. The superior mind needs to prove nothing, only sustain the illusion until it becomes reality. And this illusion, once created, opens the doors to the construction of self-image, which, as we will see later, becomes the most powerful weapon of power. Self-image is not just a detail, it is an individual's true armor. Machiavelli would understand this clearly. If politics is guided by reality and not ideals, then how you see yourself is the reality others will see. When someone sees themselves as small, sabotages themselves, and automatically invites others to treat them the same way. The end justifies the means when it comes to power. And here the means is the intentional construction of one's own identity. It's not about creating a lie, but about projecting the most strategic version of oneself to the world. Better to be feared than loved takes on a new form. Better to be seen as someone who cannot be ignored. Those who adjust their self-image begin to control what we call the aura, that invisible field that precedes any word and prepares the ground for how they will be treated. A practical example. Consider an ordinary person who decides to radically change the way they present themselves. They pay attention to their posture, their clothes, their gaze. At work, they begin to speak less but more firmly. Little by little, colleagues who previously ignored their ideas begin to listen attentively. The calculated use of force lies not in raising one's voice, but in adjusting others' perception of them. Loyal armies of their own here manifest themselves in small symbols, a striking signature, a confident tone of voice, a coherent visual style. It's constant adaptability applied to the social game. With every move, the consolidated self-image reinforces a silent message: I deserve to be here. And since true human nature responds more to form than content, perception becomes truth even before the results appear. Caring for your self-image doesn't mean being artificial, but being strategic. The appearance of virtue, for example, isn't about feigning kindness, but about conveying a balanced strength that others respect. If you're a businessman, this can translate into taking a solid public stance, conveying credibility. If you're a student, it could be about carefully speaking when presenting a paper, demonstrating beyond the average preparation. These are gestures that seem trivial, but when combined, they build a symbolic fortress. Virtue and fortune go hand in hand. Virtue in the preparation of your image, fortune in the positive response that will come when others validate this new persona. And there's nothing more powerful than realizing that respect comes first from how you treat yourself, and only then from what you offer. It's curious to note that those who suffer most in the power game are precisely those who insist on devaluing themselves. A fragile self-image generates a cycle of submission. Those who present themselves as weak will be seen as weak. Machiavelli already warned, decisions based on true human nature reveal that men tend to exploit the hesitation of others. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean debasing yourself, but finding the balance, showing firmness without overt arrogance. By seeing yourself as worthy, you send the world the message that your presence carries weight. This is the invisible field where the battle begins before any words are spoken. What others feel toward you is a direct result of how you feel toward yourself. It is in this reflection that power is born. Therefore, self-image is more than a weapon. It's the very territory you defend. Without it, you become vulnerable. With it, you become almost untouchable. Those who understand this logic realize that every detail, from the way you dress to the way you write a WhatsApp message, is part of the battlefield. The end justifies the means when these small adjustments build a reputation that speaks for you even when you're not present. Politics guided by reality means that others will believe what you consistently project. And if the mental posture of superiority was the first step, self-image is the sword that cuts through the doubts around you. But there is still a subtle enemy to be overcome, the tendency to self-destruct in public through self-deprecation. Few mistakes are as fatal as public self-deprecation. When someone reveals insecurity in front of everyone, they let their guard down and invite the world to attack. Machiavelli would have vehemently condemned this habit. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that most don't offer support in the face of weakness, but seize the opportunity to exploit. The end justifies the means, and in this case, the means is to remain firm even when feeling lost. Better to be feared than loved resonates here. Those who expose themselves as too fragile lose respect, and respect is the most valuable currency in the human game. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean confessing every weakness in public, but rather controlling what is shown. Those who know how to swallow their doubts and project confidence gain ground that the hesitant will never have. Think of a political leader during a crisis. If they take the pulpit and declare, "I don't know what to do," they're finished. Not because it's human to have doubts, but because collective perception requires firmness. Decisions based on real human nature indicate that crowds seek security in strong figures, even if those figures are improvising. It's the calculated use of invisible force. It's not about having all the answers, but about demonstrating that you'll keep fighting until you find them. It's better to make a mistake with a firm stance than to get it right with hesitation. The appearance of virtue, in this case, is worth more than the virtue itself. Self-image as a weapon of power is shattered when someone reveals in public that they don't believe in themselves. And in that instant, power changes hands. In the corporate world, the same thing happens. Imagine a manager who, in front of his team, starts laughing at himself in a derogatory way, saying, "I'm terrible with numbers. I always make mistakes on these spreadsheets." The laughter may seem innocent, but it undermines his authority. Loyal armies begin to scatter when they realize their commander lacks self-confidence. Constant adaptability means acknowledging weaknesses, yes, but in private, and acting to correct them. In public, the message should be different. Firmness, even when uncertain. Machiavelli would understand that showing cracks opens the door for enemies to use those flaws against you. A simple, misplaced comment can become ammunition for those who want your downfall. And in this game, even friends can become rivals if they perceive too much vulnerability. Of course, there's a difference between humility and self-deprecation. Strategic humility opens doors because it shows humanity without losing one's composure. But self-deprecation invites disrespect. Avoiding being hated involves balancing this point, admitting limitations without publicly destroying oneself. For example, instead of saying, "I'm bad with finance," a leader could say, "My strength lies in strategy. That's why I have financial experts by my side." This shift in narrative maintains the aura of command. Virtue and fortune are at work here once again. Virtue when choosing words that protect one's image, fortune when others respond with respect. The world respects those who respect themselves. And those who put themselves down will sooner or later be trampled by those who are just waiting for an opening to rise. Ultimately, public self-deprecation is a betrayal of oneself. It's like raising a white flag before the enemy even attacks. Reality-driven politics reminds us that the social stage is a constant battlefield, and every word is either a blow or a defense. When someone diminishes themselves in public, they destroy the image they've been building. And no matter how competent they are in private, the collective memory will preserve the scene of weakness. This is why those seeking power must learn to silence certain confessions. The war against self-deprecation is internal, but its effects are external. And when someone masters this art of preserving their own image, they open the door to the next move, controlling not only what they don't say, but also what they choose to show. Those who don't control their own narrative are controlled by the narratives of others. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires each individual to be the author of their own story. The end justifies the means, and here, the means is simple. Decide how you want to be seen and act every day to reinforce that image. Better to be feared than loved translates into something practical. Better to be remembered for a mark of steadfastness than forgotten as someone ordinary. The appearance of virtue is the essence of this game. It's not just who you are, but what you convey. Every word, every silence, every gesture composes chapters of a biography that the world writes about you, even without you realizing it. And if you don't edit this work in real time, someone else will. Imagine a professional who decides to be recognized as a reference in their field. If they let others choose their words, their public image will be a distorted reflection. But if they control the narrative, they continually reinforce their authority. This can be done in small details, how they present themselves in meetings, how they respond to criticism, even how they post on social media. Loyal armies in this case are the habits and rituals that reinforce the same message every day. Constant adaptability is key, knowing how to shape the tone of the narrative without losing its essence. A practical example would be a writer who always repeats their identity in interviews, reinforcing where they came from, what they believe in, and how they got there. Gradually, this version becomes the only one accepted by the public. In politics, this control is even more brutal. Failed leaders didn't fall simply because of bad decisions, but because they lost control of the narrative. When public opinion takes over, not even the largest physical army can save a reputation. Decisions based on real human nature show that people believe stories more than facts. Those who narrate control. Those who hesitate lose. The calculated use of force can involve manipulating a sentence, giving an interview at the right moment, or remaining silent when everyone expects a reaction. Avoiding being hated depends less on what one does and more on how one makes oneself appear. And this isn't empty theater, it's conscious strategy, an invisible chess game where every move shapes perceptions. The public rarely sees beyond the narrative offered. But controlling the narrative isn't just for great leaders or politicians. It's vital in everyday life too. How often does someone lose respect in a group simply because they don't know how to tell their own story? How often is a valuable person forgotten because they couldn't translate their essence into words? Virtue and fortune appear here as a duet. Virtue in crafting a solid narrative, fortune in having the right audience to listen to it. The difference between being seen as mediocre or indispensable lies in how you guide that narrative. And ironically, this doesn't require inventing anything false. It simply requires choosing the right chapters to show. Life is an open book, but only you decide which pages others will have access to. This awareness changes everything. When someone assumes they're always selling an image, they begin to act with greater precision. The end justifies the means because the reward is clear: respect, authority, and space. Politics guided by reality is understanding that people don't see your essence, only what you allow to shine through. And if up until now we've talked about how to avoid self-deprecation and projecting superiority, now the game becomes even more refined, eliciting admiration and respect without shouting, without aggressively imposing. This is the next step in the art of shaping perceptions, learning to be remembered for what you make people feel, not just what you say out loud. True power doesn't need to scream to be noticed. Machiavelli taught that reality-driven politics requires balance, firmness without unnecessary brutality. The end justifies the means when the goal is to inspire admiration without falling into the trap of arrogance. Better to be feared than loved is still valid, but fear can be silent, almost imperceptible, when born of a solid presence. Avoiding being hated means walking that fine line between respect and excessive provocation. Those who can appear self-assured without needing to humiliate achieve an almost magnetic aura. The appearance of virtue is key here. It is possible to appear strong without appearing oppressive, to appear confident without appearing arrogant. The result is a space conquered by strategic elegance, not by brute imposition. Imagine a leader at a negotiating table. They don't need to pound the table or raise their voice. They simply observe, listen more than they speak, and when they decide to speak, each word weighs like iron. This is the calculated use of force, not wasting energy trying to impress, but choosing surgical moments to speak. Loyal armies in this context are made up of gestures of respect, keeping a steady gaze, smiling lightly without exaggeration, using silence as an ally. The impact is inevitable. Others feel they are faced with someone who knows their worth. Constant adaptability also comes into play, at times demonstrating gentleness, at others absolute firmness, but never letting the image of authority slip away. Respect is sown through consistency. In practice, arousing admiration without arrogance means understanding that true human nature is drawn to mystery and security. People who talk too much, who boast, end up becoming predictable. Those who let their actions speak for themselves create an atmosphere that intrigues and attracts. It's like seeing someone who doesn't need to compete to be noticed, Virtue and fortune come together in this detail. Virtue in the inner mastery of not needing to prove anything. Fortune in the effect this has on others. The secret is to allow others to reach the conclusion for themselves. This person is different. It is at this point that respect transforms into admiration, and admiration into influence. An influence much more lasting than that achieved by shouting or brute force. A historical example helps illustrate this. Consider Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. He didn't need excessive displays of power. His serenity was enough. This is the perfect portrayal of the appearance of virtue, appearing above petty squabbles while still maintaining absolute control over them. The end justifies the means when this style generates stability, because people respect those who convey calm amidst chaos. Avoiding being hated once again connects here. A leader who doesn't flaunt power aggressively is more tolerated and remembered with reverence. And this same principle can be applied in any modern setting, whether in a work meeting, a social dinner, or a business negotiation. What is projected is stronger than what is said. This subtle line between confidence and arrogance is what separates lasting leaders from fleeting figures. Those who master this art build a silent legacy. It's politics guided by reality, not impulse. It's the calculated use of force that makes a simple presence enough to reorganize an entire environment. And the more someone practices this posture, the more natural it becomes. The key is to remember, power doesn't need fuss. Those who truly possess it become a reference without needing explanation. But to keep this image from weakening, it's necessary to align speech, gestures, and even gaze. This is what we call congruent behavior, and without it, the entire facade of superiority crumbles at the slightest detail. Nothing destroys an image of power faster than incongruity. Machiavelli is said to have said that politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands coherence between what is said and what is done. The end justifies the means, but these means must be aligned, body, voice, and attitude marching in the same direction. Better to be feared than loved only works if posture matches the word. If someone speaks of confidence but shrinks in their chair, the speech falls flat. The appearance of virtue in this case is more important than the virtue itself. Substance is not enough. One must demonstrate congruence. Power is perceived as solid only when there are no fissures between narrative and performance. And those who don't understand this lose before they even begin. Imagine a speaker taking the stage to speak about courage. His voice trembles, he avoids eye contact, and nervously fidgets with his hands. All the content that could impact the audience is lost because his body language contradicts his message. Loyal armies are not only external followers, but also internal habits that sustain the speech. Constant adaptability means adjusting the tone without losing coherence. If the situation calls for firmness, the body must be firm. If it calls for acceptance, the body must express openness. The calculated use of force in this scenario is silent. It involves lifting the chin, opening the shoulders, and using pauses with precision. Congruence reinforces each word with a gesture, each idea with a look. And the effect is immediate. Credibility. In politics and business, outstanding leaders are those who align even the smallest details. Think of Steve Jobs, for example. When presenting new products, his posture, calm voice, and conviction created a coherent spectacle. He knew that true human nature is mesmerized by consistency. When everything, clothing, tone of voice, expressions, points in the same direction, there's no room for doubt. Virtue and fortune work together. Virtue in mastering oneself, fortune in the reaction of the public, who allow themselves to be guided by the solid image. The power of congruent behavior lies in leaving no gaps. People don't consciously analyze every detail, but they sense when something doesn't add up, and that feeling can be the difference between following or abandoning someone. Being congruent doesn't mean being rigid. On the contrary, it requires subtlety and intelligence. Avoiding being hated, for example, may depend on adapting behavior without losing coherence. If a leader talks about empathy but never smiles, their message seems false. If they talk about discipline but arrive late, they lose respect. The end justifies the means when every action reinforces the chosen narrative. It's politics guided by reality. Human beings need to believe what they see, not just what they hear. And belief is only possible when there's no noise between words and actions. That's why the greatest strategists know how to rehearse even silence. Every pause, every glance, every breath serves to cement the image they wish to establish in others. Congruent behavior is like a well-tuned melody. All the instruments play together, creating harmony. When there's dissonance, the audience notices it immediately, even if they can't explain it. This harmony is the foundation of authority. And when congruence becomes natural, respect comes effortlessly. Better to be feared than loved becomes silent respect, almost reverence. The calculated use of force translates into dominating not only what is spoken, but what is conveyed without words. This is how leaders become symbols, not just because they speak well, but because every part of their being confirms the message. And when this happens, an inevitable effect on others emerges, a profound psychological impact, capable of shaping perceptions and even involuntary submission. When someone adopts a posture of superiority, builds a solid self-image, avoids self-deprecation, controls the narrative and acts congruently, the inevitable result is a psychological impact on others. Machiavelli already knew that politics guided by reality, not ideals, operates in the realm of perception. The end justifies the means because the human mind is easily shaped by the impression it receives. Better to be feared than loved acts like an invisible code. People retreat from those who convey silent strength. Avoiding being hated is part of the balance, but there's no denying it. Respect arises when others perceive they are faced with someone who will not waver. This effect is not a public choice. It's almost instinctive. The human brain recognizes authority even without concrete evidence. Consider an everyday example. A person enters a meeting room without saying anything. The mere way they walk, the firmness of their gaze, and the strategic silence create tension in the room. Everyone notices their presence. This is the calculated use of force at its most refined. There's no need to raise your voice or impose aggressive gestures. Here, loyal armies become the aura of authority that accompanies them. True human nature responds to symbols of power with hesitation and respect. It's as if the brain, programmed for survival, recognizes signs of leadership and automatically grants space. Constant adaptability ensures that this effect is not lost. In formal settings, gravity; in intimate circles, controlled lightness, but always maintaining the core of untouchable authority. This psychological impact isn't limited to the physical environment. The same thing happens in the digital world. Profiles that convey visual and narrative authority gain followers who treat them as unquestionable references. It's the appearance of virtue transformed into symbolic capital. Virtue and fortune work together. Virtue in the intentional construction of the image, fortune in the collective effect that transforms that image into power. It's impressive how a person who takes a firm stance on social media quickly becomes a voice that shapes opinions, even if, behind the scenes, they're still under construction. The public doesn't analyze things coldly. They react to perceived congruence. And when this psychological effect is consolidated, it feeds back. The more respect they receive, the more trust they project. And the more trust they project, the more respect they receive. there's also the contrast effect. When someone confident stands next to someone insecure, the difference intensifies. The public unconsciously compares. Decisions based on real human nature show that this comparison is inevitable. And here, the end justifies the means once again. Maintaining firmness in the face of others' hesitations increases the psychological impact of one's own image. Avoiding being hated, however, requires caution, using this contrast without humiliating. It's more powerful to let others perceive it for themselves. This subtlety transforms simple presence into dominance. Respect doesn't need to be demanded. It settles like a shadow that organizes the environment. And those who master this invisible field can guide people without them realizing they're being guided. This psychological effect is perhaps the most fascinating result of the entire strategy. It proves that power depends not only on material resources, but on the ability to shape perceptions. Reality-driven politics shows that people obey their feelings more than their thoughts. An appearance of virtue, a firm stance, a calculated use of force, all these elements converge to create an atmosphere where others simply give in. It's as if the collective mind says, "This person knows where to go, we should follow them." And at that point, the game is won. But this effect doesn't arise by chance. It's the result of discipline in every detail that precedes it. And when well established, it leads to an even rarer state, becoming untouchable, someone who endures criticism, attacks, and challenges while maintaining their symbolic authority intact. Now that you've navigated each layer of this strategy, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you continue hiding behind naivete, hoping the world will recognize your goodness? Or will you apply what you've learned and take control of your own narrative? Reality-driven politics leaves no room for hesitation. The end justifies the means. And in this case, the means is transforming your posture, your self-image, and the psychological impact you have on others. How many times have you been ignored because you seem too small? How many times has someone with less preparation but more presence walked all over you? Better to be feared than loved isn't a cruel choice. It's a warning about how human nature truly works. Avoiding being hated requires intelligence, but avoiding being irrelevant requires courage. And that courage begins when you decide that you will never again demean yourself, that you will never again hand ammunition to the enemy. Respect isn't born by chance. It's cultivated, rehearsed, reinforced until it becomes inevitable. The appearance of virtue that Machiavelli so often cited isn't a lie, it's a strategy. If you don't shape your image, someone else will. And when that happens, you've already lost. The calculated use of force begins in the small things, in the tone of voice, in the strategic silence, in the way you enter a room. Every detail communicates who you are before you even open your mouth. So I challenge you, will you leave this video the same as when you entered, or will you put what you've learned into practice? Will you continue to be controlled by other people's narratives, or will you build your own loyal armies within yourself? Habits, discipline, presence, so you'll never again be treated like an ordinary person? The decision is yours. And decisions based on reality are the only ones that change destinies. If something within you has awakened, if this knowledge has lit a flame, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Here, you will learn to play the game few have the courage to expose. Because in the end, those who understand Machiavelli don't ask for respect, they earn it.